Associate head coach Melissa Beatty-Smoos of the San Jose State Spartans women's volleyball team is under indefinite suspension after filing a Title IX complaint against the school. She says the player Blaire Fleming is transgender.
All right, so get this. You have a college volleyball team, and they're winning, but like a lot of their wins are by default.
Really?
Because the other teams just refuse to play them.
Wow.
Yeah, and now they're going to the playoffs, and guess what? They might have to face those same teams again.
Oh, that's got to be awkward.
Yeah, talk about a rematch, right?
Yeah.
So today we are diving into this story that's kind of like straight out of a sports movie, but with like real-world drama.
Yeah, definitely a unique situation, and it's happening right now with the San Jose State University volleyball team.
San Jose State. Okay, so what is going on? Like, what's the backstory here?
Right.
Why are these teams refusing to play San Jose State?
Well, it all comes down to this transgender athlete, Blaire Fleming. She's on the SJSU team.
Okay.
And some people are challenging whether she should be allowed to compete in women's sports.
I see.
And that's what's led to these, like, unprecedented forfeited matches and even some legal battles, you know?
Wow, so it's not just about volleyball.
No, it's definitely bigger than volleyball.
This is about gender identity and like fairness in sports and even how legal systems are dealing with all these like rapidly changing ideas.
It's true, and it's playing out so publicly with real consequences, you know?
Yeah, so how did SJSU even get into this situation in the first place? I mean, they're going to the playoffs, so clearly they must be doing something right on the court.
Yeah, they finished the regular season with a winning record.
Okay.
But 6 of those wins were because other teams forfeited.
Oh, wow.
And now they're heading into a semifinal match against either Utah State or Boise State.
Okay.
Both of those teams refused to play them earlier in the season.
Oh, so this is like a rematch situation.
It is.
Wow, hold on. Boise State forfeited twice.
Twice they did.
They must have some strong feelings about this.
Yeah, they really do. And, you know, Utah State isn't just sitting back either.
Okay.
They actually joined a lawsuit against the Mountain West Conference's decision to let Fleming play. They want that loss reversed.
Wow, so you've got teams refusing to play lawsuits happening and like this huge cloud of uncertainty hanging over the entire tournament.
It's true.
What's the mood like for the San Jose State team? Like, what are the players saying?
Well, one of the articles we have is an interview with the SJSU co-captain. Her name's Brooke Slusser, and she's worried that their opponents might not even show up for the playoffs.
Oh, man, that's got to be tough for the players.
Yeah.
Just trying to focus on your game with all of this happening.
Exactly. And she said something that really stuck with me.
What was that?
She said they're just taking things day by day and taking the punches as they come.
Wow, that really sums up the situation for them.
It does. It shows how much this is affecting them.
Okay, so say a team does forfeit a playoff match.
Right.
Does San Jose State just automatically move on?
Yeah, the Mountain West Conference actually has a plan for that, which is crazy because it shows how unusual this all is.
Yeah.
If a team forfeits the championship match, San Jose State automatically wins and moves on to the next level of competition.
Wow, that's a bold move by the conference.
It is.
But I'm guessing it might not be that simple.
Right.
Because there's that lawsuit challenging Fleming's eligibility.
You're right. There's a federal judge in Colorado looking at the lawsuit, and whatever he decides could change everything.
And, you know, I was reading one of the articles, and it mentioned that the judge spent a lot of time in one of the hearings just debating which pronouns to use for Fleming.
I know. Isn't that interesting?
It is.
It seems like a small detail, but it actually points to a much bigger issue.
What's that?
How are legal systems supposed to deal with these evolving ideas of gender identity?
That's a great point. And it could have implications for future cases way beyond just sports.
Exactly.
So before we go any further, let's take a step back. What's San Jose State University's official stance on all this?
Well, SJSU has been very clear and consistent in their support of Fleming. They say she's eligible to play under both NCAA and Mountain West Conference rules. They've even issued statements defending her right to compete and saying how disappointed they are about the forfeited matches because it's hurting the whole team, not just Fleming.
And this whole situation really highlights the larger national conversation about transgender athletes in women's sports.
It does.
There are just so many strong opinions and concerns from all sides.
You mentioned the lawsuit challenging Fleming's eligibility.
Yeah.
What are they actually arguing in that lawsuit, and how does that connect to those Title IX protections for women athletes?
That's a great question, and it goes right to the heart of this whole debate.
It does.
What are the ethical arguments from people who don't want transgender athletes in women's sports? What are their concerns about fairness, and how do they suggest addressing those concerns while still respecting the rights of transgender individuals.
Right. It seems like finding that balance is the key here.
It really does.
Because on one side, you have people who are worried that allowing transgender women to compete will take away from the progress made in women's sports.
I can see.
But then on the other side, you have the argument that excluding transgender athletes sends this message that they're not accepted or valued.
So where do we go from here? This isn't just happening in courtrooms and on college campuses. This is a conversation for everyone.
You're absolutely right. And it's a conversation that needs empathy and understanding.
Yep.
We need to be willing to engage with people, even if their views are different from our own.
For sure.
Yeah.
And we also need to remember that this case is just one example of a much bigger issue.
Yeah.
Transgender athletes are competing at all levels of sports.
Right.
And each situation has its own unique challenges and complexities.
And one of the big arguments in favor of inclusion is this idea of fairness and equal opportunity.
Okay.
Supporters say that transgender athletes should have the same chances to compete as any other athlete, regardless of their gender identity.
I can see that perspective. It's in line with those broader human rights principles.
Exactly.
Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect.
Right. And they say that if you exclude transgender athletes, it sends a bad message.
Like they're not fully accepted.
Yeah, like they're not accepted or valued.
But what about the people who are against transgender athletes in women's sports? What are their concerns?
Well, one of the main arguments is about fairness and competition.
Okay.
Specifically, the idea that transgender women who maybe went through male puberty could have a physical advantage.
I see.
Over cisgender women, it's complicated.
Yeah, so it's about figuring out how to deal with those physiological differences, like bone density and muscle mass.
Exactly.
Which could give transgender women an edge in certain sports.
Yes, and it's tough because it brings up those conversations about biology and gender identity and what a level playing field actually means.
And it's a really sensitive area.
It is.
There's a lot of scientific research happening around this topic.
Oh, there's tons of it. And the data can be interpreted in so many ways.
Yeah, it's not like there's an easy answer.
No, not at all. And it gets even harder because every athlete is different,
True. Regardless of their gender identity.
Exactly.
So how are policymakers and athletic organizations even approaching this?
Yeah.
It feels like finding a solution that balances the rights of transgender athletes with fairness is almost impossible.
It's a tough one for sure.
Yeah.
There are a few different approaches that they're considering.
Okay, like what?
Some people want hormone-level testing to make sure everything's fair, and others are suggesting separate categories for transgender athletes.
But even those solutions have issues, right?
Yeah, because hormone testing brings up concerns about privacy and, medical stuff.
Right.
And separate categories could be seen as segregation.
Which kind of goes against the whole idea of inclusion.
Exactly.
So if those aren't the best solutions, what's the alternative?
Well, some people think we should look beyond physical characteristics and consider things like training skill level and overall ability.
That makes sense. It's important not to oversimplify a complex issue.
I agree. And I think the real key is to move away from those rigid one-size-fits-all solutions.
Yeah.
And find more individualized approaches,
For sure.
We have to recognize that the transgender community is diverse.
Right.
We can't just make generalizations.
It sounds like open and honest conversations are really crucial here.
They are.
Instead of just digging into our own opinions, we need to listen to each other.
Yeah.
And consider all those different viewpoints and find common ground.
For sure. And this case with Blaire Fleming and the SJSU volleyball team is such a good example of why that's so important.
Yeah.
Because even though it's about college athletics, it has implications for everyone.
It's like a microcosm of a much bigger conversation about gender identity and inclusion.
Exactly. And how we deal with difficult issues with empathy and understanding.
Exactly. As we wrap up this deep dive, we should think about why this story matters to our listener.
We're right.
Even if they don't care about volleyball or aren't personally affected by these issues.
Good point. Why should they care?
Exactly.
Well, for one thing, this case shows how individual stories can become like these flashpoints for these huge societal debates.
Yeah.
It forces us to think about really challenging questions about fairness, equality, and even the whole idea of competition.
It reminds us that these abstract debates have real consequences for people.
They do.
And they shape the future of our society.
And even if someone doesn't have strong opinions about transgender athletes in sports, this case shows how complicated it is to navigate these rapid social changes.
Yeah, it challenges us to examine our own assumptions and biases
It does.
and to really try to understand different viewpoints.
Exactly. And ultimately, it's about building a society that values both fairness and inclusion,
Right.
where we can approach these difficult issues with empathy and understanding.
Well said. On that note, I think it's time to wrap things up with a final question for our listeners to think about. Okay, so after going through all of this, what's the question we should leave our listeners with?
Well, given everything we've talked about, how do you think this whole situation with Blaire Fleming and others, will affect how the rules and policies are made about transgender athletes in college sports in the future? And what are the possible consequences of those different approaches, both good and bad?
That is a great question. It really makes you think about how this case could have a ripple effect and change the landscape of college athletics for years to come.
Yeah, and it's not just courts that will be making decisions. It'll be athletic organizations like the NCAA and just society in general.
Right.
Will they choose inclusion or exclusion? Will they focus on physical differences or look at individual cases?
And it's bigger than rules, too. It's
Yeah.
about building a culture where all athletes feel welcome and respected.
Exactly, no matter their gender identity.
Yeah, if we can just have these conversations with open minds and really try to understand each other's perspectives, maybe we can find a way forward that balances fairness and inclusion in sports.
I think so too.
It's been quite a journey exploring this complex issue. I feel like we've covered so much.
We have.
From the specifics of the San Jose State volleyball case to the broader conversation about transgender athletes.
And as with any deep dive, we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah, but hopefully we've sparked some curiosity and encouraged people to think critically and, given our listeners some new information to consider.
Definitely.
So what's our final takeaway for everyone listening?
Keep learning, keep questioning, and keep having those thoughtful conversations about this important topic, the future of college sports. And really, our society depends on it.
Well said. That wraps up this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.